violin string were made conscious. And when the violinist picked up the string, the violin, he began to tighten the strings. If that string were conscious, it would say, "Do not do this to me. This pains me. Can you not see that I am shrieking with pain?" The violinist would say, "Suffer it. Just for a moment. You were created to produce a melody. And die to your relaxation for just a second, and you will produce a beautiful melody." So it is with the sculptor. If the block of marble were conscious, certainly the block of marble would protest against the hammer and the chisel. But the sculptor knows that inside, as Michelangelo said, inside of every block of marble is an image. And to bring it out requires control and discipline, mortification. And in vain would one bring out the image without the cutting. And in vain also would one produce from within oneself the image of that which is divine without some mortification and pain.
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Welcome, Catholic pilgrims, to week 8. I gotta tell you, when I first read this week's readings, I was so excited to make this podcast because Bishop Sheen is going to mention a name in our readings this week that until, a year ago, I had no clue who this person was. But because I lived in Turkey for a year, I know who he is. And when I saw the name, I was like, wait a minute, I know that name. And yes, I was right. I did know that name. I actually had to go look up some things to remind myself fully of who he was and exactly what he did. But it's amazing how you learn about something and you've maybe never heard it before. And then once you learn it, you see references to it everywhere. I just think that is so cool. So anyway, we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson because I really need you to understand who this person is so that we can really understand what Bishop Sheen is trying to say in our readings. So this week is called Perfection is Not Automatic. Remember, this is under the section of goodness. And so the 3 points to pay attention to are recognition, realization of an ideal, and sense of imperfection. Number 8, perfection is not automatic. Whenever anyone hears of a new psychological theory, such as the ability to see the future in a dim way, or reads of a drug which retards old age, there's almost a cosmic rush to the conclusion that in a few years humanity will be free from error and immune from disease. This urge to perfection is right and good, for there is no reason why the evolutionary process should stand still once it comes to human beings. But the fallacy is that we human beings always think of this perfection as coming to us without our own effort or the exercise of our own free will. Perfection is regarded as available without cost, but not like the crown of effort, such as playing the piano, which is born of 1,000 acts of the will and the tediousness of exercises. Perfection is thus taken out of the moral order and reduced to the physical order. It is something that is given to us rather than something we acquire. It comes like a surprise legacy which we did not earn nor merit, rather than as a prize which was won by blood and sweat and tears. The truth is that perfection has something to do with becoming what we are not, and that this becoming is achieved through willing, self-discipline, and even suffering, and implies an ideal above us and one toward which we strive. Perfection is the plenitude of goodness, or the uniting within ourselves of goodness and happiness. This, in turn, demands distinction and comparison. For example, suppose a person wished to be a good archaeologist, such as one of the greatest of them all, Heinrich Schliemann. 3 factors were required. 1. A recognition of the fact that there was much to learn. 2. A realization of an ideal and the working toward it as the task of his life. 3. A sense of his own imperfection. This sense of imperfection came to him as a boy of 7, when his father told him about the heroes of Homer and how the mighty city of Troy was leveled and burned. The idea of perfection, from the point of view of Greek archaeology, would be to discover the city of Troy. When his father told him that nobody knew where the city of Troy stood, to him perfection was expressed in the sentence, "When I am big, I shall go to Greece and find Troy and the king's treasure." The 3rd stage was the development of that idea. He learned many modern languages, studying Greek history and Homer until he knew him by heart. Finally, in the year 1873, after digging up 325,000 cubic yards of earth, he found Troy and the king's treasure. But there is not only archaeological perfection, there is also human perfection, that is, our growth in goodness as human beings. This, too, implies 3 terms. The first 2 are correlative, a sense of our own imperfection and an idea of perfection, which is God. The more we believe we know it all, and that we have never done anything wrong for which we have to expiate our guilt, the less is our impulse toward anything better. That is why subjectively, though not objectively, the more we inflate our ego, the less important God seems to be. The sick person recognizes the need of a physician, the ignorant mind recognizes the need of a teacher, and the soul, which recognizes its own unworthiness, yearns for God to complete its personality. In between these 2 correlatives, namely the thirst and the fountain, hunger and the bread of life, there comes the 3rd essential for moral perfection, namely, an act of the will by which one begins to lop off imperfections through restraint, sacrifice, self-discipline, and begins the positive achievement toward the divine goal. What impels us toward this perfection is love, for when we love perfection, we eliminate everything which offends the loved one. For example, a girl will wear red, even though she does not like it because she knows it pleases her beloved. Michelangelo once was asked how he carved his statues. He said that it was very easy. Inside of every block of marble is a beautiful form. All you have to do is cut away the marble, and the form will appear. In like manner, in every person, there is a possible new self, the ideal self. All one has to do is first to have an image of the model before one and trust in his grace, and then cut off huge chunks of selfishness and egotism until the divine image appears. So towards the end of our stay in Turkey, we were able to go up to Troy, the ancient city of Troy. And the first place we went was to a city called Çanakkale. I love saying that name. Çanakkale, it's such a cool name, it just rolls off your tongue. Anyway, the ancient city of Troy is situated kind of a little southwest of Çanakkale. Anyway, we got to go there for a weekend, and it was a fantastic trip. You know, I had grown up hearing about Troy in my English classes. I read the Odyssey in my, I think it was like 11th grade English class. You know, Homer is referenced everywhere, and Homer was actually born in Turkey. So, you know, the whole idea of going to Troy was very cool to me, and I was really, really looking forward to it. So when we get there, you know, we're walking around, and you can picture in your mind how grand it once was. And it used to be a lot closer to the water than it is today, you know, as things recede and shores fill up with silt. It sits way back from the water now when it didn't used to. So anyways, our guide is taking us along. He's showing us different excavations and things like that. And we get to this one part and he's talking about how this archaeologist came and he just dug this huge trench through here and just destroyed so much. He didn't know what he was doing and he found treasure, and the Turkish people are kind of upset about that. And he took it away and he didn't do a good job. And that was the first time I ever heard mention the name Heinrich Schliemann, who Bishop Sheen talks about here today, the archaeologist. And I'm telling you, this guy's life is like something out of a movie. He was German. He was born in Germany, but he did not live his life rooted in Germany for sure. He literally traveled the world. He was kind of one of those guys who was just a jack of all trades, never stay in one place too long, always got to be on the move. And it is true, when he was 7 years old, his dad was telling him about Homer and about Troy, and that's where this seed got planted in him, that one day he was going to go and find Troy. And so everything about his life was leading up to that moment. And that's what Fulton Sheen is talking about here. He's like, suppose finding the city of Troy was the height of perfection for Greek archaeology. What would you do in order to, help you reach that goal, that perfection? And so really what this guy did is he just immersed himself in everything Greek and everything Homer. And he was very good at languages and he picked them up really quickly. And he studied hard, basically mostly all self-taught. And he was just one of those guys who was very high energy. He worked for a time as a grocer and then a cabin boy. He was shipwrecked off some Dutch islands. He was a bookkeeper. He eventually ends up in Russia, and that's where he meets his first wife and they get married. And he makes a ton of money off of being a military contractor during the Crimean War. And so now he has the money to do what he's always wanted to do, but he knows he lacks the knowledge of doing real archaeological work. And so what does he do? He takes his fortune and he just starts traveling the world and going to all these different places in order to learn. And so he goes to Italy and India and Japan and Syria, and just all over. I mean, this is in the 1800s. So, travel wasn't that easy, but this guy definitely got around. Well, he ends up in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and this is during the Ottoman Empire. And he meets up with this man named Frank Calvert. And Frank Calvert was an Englishman living in Turkey. Those are called Levantines. I learned that while living in Turkey. And he was living in an area not far from Çanakkale, and he had been kind of scouting out the area because he too wanted to find the ancient city of Troy. And what he lacked was money. Now, he was an actual archaeologist. I wouldn't say that Heinrich Schliemann was a full-blown archaeologist. He did study a bit. He did travel around trying to learn, but I don't think he was like classically trained. So anyway, these two guys meet up and Frank Calvert is like, look, I'm pretty sure I've scouted out the location. It's in this place called Hisarlik, and that's Turkish for citadel. And so at the time, it was just this mound. And so Frank Calvert needed Heinrich Schliemann's money, and Heinrich Schliemann really wanted to make this discovery. I mean, both of them did. But they get together and they're like, let's do this. And so they go, and using Heinrich Schliemann's money, they start digging. And lo and behold, they find the ancient city of Troy. And Heinrich Schliemann did kind of do a sloppy job. I think he was just so interested in finding the ancient city of Troy, and he really wanted to find the king's treasure, that he wasn't as detail-oriented and as careful as, archaeologists should be. So anyway, they're digging. They dug this huge trench, the one that I saw, and they found the king's treasure. It's called the Priam's treasure. He was the last king of Troy. And that's what, all the myths were about and the legends and everything. And people weren't quite sure if it was real. Well, they found it. And so Heinrich Schliemann sneaks it out of Turkey. And later on, he wants to come back and do some more digging. And, the Ottoman Empire is not super happy with him. But they do end up eventually, after several years, allowing him to come back in and dig. So I know that was a history lesson, but you really got to understand this guy, because at 7 years old, he had this vision of perfection. And that's what Fulton Sheen talks about. He heard the story and it captivated him. And so he makes this goal. He's like, the perfection of Greek archaeology would be to find the ancient city of Troy, because people didn't know if it was actually real or not. And so Bishop Sheen is taking this man's story and likening it to our perfection as human beings. And so what I want to do is just kind of walk through some of this and pull it out. And the whole time that we're pulling out, keep in mind Heinrich Schliemann and what he had to do in order to find that pinnacle of perfection in Greek archaeology. So on the first page, on page 28, he says, "But the fallacy is that we human beings always think of this perfection as coming to us without our own effort or the exercise of our own free will." And that's kind of how things have gotten today. We just want perfection to kind of either just fall into our lap. Is there a pill I can take? Is there some quick fix I can do to make me perfect? And we just get, handed perfection. Like he says, it's almost like a surprise legacy. Congratulations, you're perfect now. But perfection does not work that way. There are steps that have to be taken in order to reach that ideal of who God made you to be, right? So just like Heinrich Schliemann, we have to realize that if you want to reach that perfection, that true person that God created you to be, you're going to have to do stuff. You're going to have to be active. You're going to have to make a plan little by little in order to achieve that. It's not going to fall into your lap. He goes on to say, the truth is that perfection has something to do with becoming what we are not, and that this becoming is achieved through willing, self-discipline, and even suffering. Heinrich Schliemann, he had to have the will, and he definitely had that. He had to have the will to go out and chase this dream of perfection. And he had to be self-disciplined. Now, he was kind of a all over the place type of guy, definitely an adventurer. But he still did the things that he needed to do in order to make his dream happen. He totally immersed himself in Greek culture. He knew Homer inside out, as Fulton Sheen said. He traveled the world. He worked with archaeologists. He knew he needed money, so he found a way to do that. And bit by bit, he grows in his knowledge in different areas so that one day he can take all of that knowledge that he's learned and put it together and then go find Troy. And so he did have to be self-disciplined in that area. He had to realize that he had a lot to learn and there were certain things that he needed to do. And he did them. He really did them. And then suffering. He had endeavors that worked and endeavors that didn't, but he just kept going. And so how does this relate to us in our perfection? Because this is what this is about. It's not about Greek archaeology. It's about the perfection of us as human beings. These are the steps that we have to follow. We have to realize that we have a lot to learn. We know that God created us for something. He put us here for a reason. We have a mission. There is an ideal in His mind of who we are, and it's wonderful and great and full of goodness, that person that He created us to be. So if we understand that, if we If we know that and we realize that through reading the Bible and going to Mass and, educating ourselves, then we know that we are dependent upon God to reach that. We cannot do it on our own. But if we recognize that, then there are steps that we need to take. And so what do we need to do in order to get there? And so the first part is, the learning about ourselves, going to confession, realizing what our sins are. He even talks about chipping away at, a block, getting rid of those imperfections so that the divine image can come out. And those are the types of things that we have to do. But sadly, a lot of times we just don't want to hear that there's anything wrong with us. And that's what he talks about here at the very end of page 29. He says, the more we believe we know it all, and that we have never done anything wrong for which we have to expiate our guilt, the less is our impulse toward anything better. If we don't think that we've done anything wrong, if we don't think there's anything to chisel off of us, if we try to stay away from suffering because it's too uncomfortable, I don't want to hear this, and we stick our fingers in our ears, and we don't want anybody to ever criticize anything, and we tell everybody that, we're perfect. We're perfect just the way we are. There's nothing we need to work on. That we're actually never going to reach that better us. We're never going to reach that. And that's a lot of what goes on today. People just declare themselves perfect, or they'll take like a negative trait and just declare it as good. For example, I see this one a lot. They'll say, if you're a bossy girl, you're not bossy. That just means you're a leader. Well, no, it probably means that you're bossy. And if you just tell people, hey, bossy is not bad, bossy means you're a leader, keep on bossing away, people think that they've reached that level of perfection. Hey, I'm bossy, and that means leadership, and so there's nothing I need to work on. And if you come and tell me that I'm not that great of a leader, I'm not going to listen to you, because I don't want to hear anything bad about myself. And so because we don't want to hear or recognize that we are not perfect, the irony is we will never actually reach perfection. And I know that we all think that perfection is absolutely impossible, but with God's help, it really isn't. And it's a step-by-step process. And we do have to rely upon Him, call on His help, ask for His graces, be patient with ourselves, be willing to chisel away those bad parts of ourselves, kind of, whittle those parts away and get rid of them. And that can be very difficult, and it can cause a lot of suffering. But if we're willing to do that, amazing things happen. We're not only better for ourselves, we're better for those in our family, we're better for our coworkers, we're better for everybody, really, everybody, if we really and truly look at ourselves and recognize that there is an ideal and have that realization of the ideal, but that the ideal can be attained if we do the right things. So I'll just end with this last part here. And I think it's so beautiful. He had such a way with words, Fulton Sheen, and I just love the way he writes. He says, all one has to do is first to have an image of the model before one and trust in His grace, and then cut off huge chunks of selfishness and egotism until the divine image appears. Because that's what the divine image is in us. It's looking more and more like Christ. So definitely something to strive for, and I hope that you're not discouraged by this. I'm sure at 7 years old, Heinrich Schliemann thought, man, I just made a huge goal to one day find the ancient city of Troy, but he did it. He did it. And we can obtain that divine image within us as well with God's help. So that is all for today, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 9. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.